My friend twitched her head and said, "Sorry, it's my Tourette's," right after calling my husband an offensive slur. My friend Kelsey announced she had Tourette's syndrome about 6 months ago. She said she'd been diagnosed after years of struggling with sudden outbursts, and that she was finally ready to be open about it. Our whole friend group rallied around her. We read articles about Tourette's so we could be supportive. We told her we'd never judge her for anything she couldn't control. We promised to have her back if strangers ever gave her trouble in public. We were good friends. Or at least we thought we were being good friends to someone who was lying to our faces. The first time I noticed something strange was at brunch 3 weeks after her announcement. Kelsey was telling a story about her coworker when she suddenly blurted out that her coworker was a fat cow. She immediately covered her mouth and apologized and said it was her Tourette's. Everyone at the table nodded sympathetically. Her coworker wasn't even there, so it didn't seem like a big deal, but I noticed that Kelsey had been complaining about this same coworker for months before her diagnosis. She'd called her lazy and annoying and incompetent in private conversations. Now suddenly she was saying worse things but blaming it on a medical condition. I pushed the thought away because I didn't want to be the kind of person who doubted someone's disability. The second time was at my birthday dinner. My husband Terrell came to pick me up at the end of the night, and Kelsey met him for the first time. She shook his hand, and then her head twitched, and she called him a racial slur. The whole table went silent. Terrell's face went hard. Kelsey immediately apologized and explained about her Tourette's, and said she was so embarrassed and that she had no control over what came out of her mouth. My other friends jumped in to explain that Kelsey had a condition and that she didn't mean it. Terrell looked at me and I could see he didn't believe her for a second. On the drive home, he asked me if I'd ever heard Kelsey say anything like that before her diagnosis. I thought about it and realized I hadn't. He said that was convenient. I told him I didn't want to accuse my friend of faking a disability. He said he wasn't accusing anyone of anything, but that he also wasn't going to sit at a table with someone who called him slurs, regardless of the excuse. I understood. Over the next few months, Kelsey's outbursts got worse and more targeted. She called our friend Diana stupid during Diana's promotion celebration. She told our friend Becca that her boyfriend was ugly during Becca's anniversary dinner. She announced that our friend Mira's cooking tasted like garbage at a potluck Mira had spent all day preparing for. Every single time she'd twitch and apologize and blame her Tourette's. Every single time our friends would comfort her and tell her it wasn't her fault. And every single time the insult happened to be something she'd expressed privately before. I started keeping track in my head. Kelsey had told me months ago that she thought Diana got promoted because of her looks, not her skills. She'd mentioned that Becca's boyfriend wasn't attractive enough for Becca. She'd complained that Mira always overcooked her food. Now all those opinions were coming out as Tourette's tics. I researched Tourette's syndrome. I learned that coprolalia, which is the involuntary swearing that people associate with Tourette's, actually only affects about 10% of people with the condition. I learned that tics were usually repetitive and consistent, not perfectly crafted insults tailored to specific situations. I learned that tics happened randomly, not conveniently, during moments when Kelsey wanted to say something mean to someone. I also noticed that Kelsey's tics only happened in English. When we went to a Japanese restaurant and the server didn't speak much English, Kelsey's Tourette's was mysteriously quiet. When we met my husband's grandmother, who only spoke Spanish, Kelsey didn't have a single outburst. Her condition apparently only activated when everyone around her could understand exactly what she was saying. I decided to test my theory. I invited Kelsey to lunch, just the two of us. I told her I wanted her honest opinion about something. I said I was thinking about getting a nose job because I'd always hated my nose. I didn't actually hate my nose, but I wanted to see what she'd do. Kelsey looked at me with sympathy and said she thought I was beautiful and didn't need to change anything. No tic, no outburst, no insult about my appearance. I said I was also thinking about quitting my job to become an artist even though I couldn't draw. Again, she was supportive and encouraging. No Tourette's. I spent the whole lunch giving her opportunities to insult me, and she didn't take any of them. Her condition apparently didn't apply when we were alone, and there was no audience to perform for. I went home and told Terrell what happened. He said he'd known from the beginning, but that he hadn't wanted to push the issue because she was my friend. I said she wasn't my friend anymore. I said someone who used a fake disability to hurt people and avoid consequences wasn't someone I wanted in my life. The next week, our friend group had a gathering at Diana's apartment. I got there 40 minutes early because I couldn't sit at home anymore. Terrell drove us in his car and kept glancing over at me like he wanted to say something comforting, but didn't know what words would help. My hands wouldn't stop shaking in my lap. I kept wiping them on my jeans, but they just got sweaty again. Diana's apartment building looked the same as always, with its brick front and the plant boxes under the windows. We climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, and I knocked before I could change my mind. Diana opened the door with her usual big smile and pulled me into a hug. She smelled like the vanilla perfume she always wore, and her apartment had that cozy feeling with the soft lighting and throw pillows everywhere. She welcomed Terrell too and seemed happy he came even though she'd only met him a few times. I could tell she didn't know what I was planning. Nobody knew except Terrell and me. The apartment filled up slowly over the next 20 minutes. Becca arrived first with a bottle of wine and started telling Diana about some problem at her job. Mira came next carrying a container of cookies she'd baked. Portia showed up right after with her loud laugh that always filled whatever room she was in. Then Kelsey walked through the door last like she planned it that way. She had on a bright red jacket and new boots, and she made sure everyone noticed both. She went around hugging each person and complimenting them on something. She told Diana the new haircut looked amazing. She told Becca those earrings were so cute. She touched Mira's arm and said something that made Mira smile. I watched the whole performance knowing exactly what it was now. A show. A carefully planned act to make everyone love her and feel special. My stomach twisted watching her work the room. Terrell stood next to me holding his beer, and I felt his hand brush against mine for just a second. A reminder that he was there, that I wasn't alone in seeing through her. We all moved into Diana's living room and settled into our usual spots. Diana had put out chips and dip on the coffee table. Someone turned on music in the background. The conversation flowed easy at first with everyone catching up on the week. Becca talked about her boyfriend maybe getting a promotion. Mira complained about her landlord raising the rent. Portia shared a funny story about her sister's wedding planning drama. Then Kelsey launched into this whole thing about her neighbor's cat that kept getting into her apartment somehow. She made it sound hilarious with all these details about finding the cat in her closet and on top of her fridge. Everyone laughed. Even Diana had tears in her eyes from laughing so hard. Kelsey glowed from the attention. She loved being the center of everything. The funny one, the entertaining one. I didn't laugh. I just watched. Terrell sat on the arm of my chair with his beer, and his face had that same look from my birthday dinner. That look that said he saw right through her and couldn't believe everyone else was falling for it. The laughter died down, and there was a natural pause while people sipped their drinks and reached for chips. My heart started pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it. This was the moment. I had to do it now before I lost my nerve. And I took a breath that felt like it filled my whole chest. Then I spoke up and said I needed to talk to everyone about something important. My voice came out steadier than I expected. The room went completely quiet. All the faces turned toward me. Becca lowered her wine glass. Mira stopped mid-reach for a cookie. Diana's smile faded into a concerned look. Portia raised her eyebrows. And Kelsey. I watched Kelsey's whole body language change. Her shoulders tensed up. Her smile froze on her face. Her eyes got this sharp look like an animal sensing danger. She knew somehow. Some instinct told her this was about her even before I said another word. I started talking and laid it all out calmly. I explained that I'd been paying attention to her tics for months now. I pointed out how every single insult matched something she'd told me privately before. How she'd complained about Diana's promotion being undeserved and then her Tourette's called Diana stupid. How she'd said Becca's boyfriend wasn't good looking, and then her tic called him ugly. How she'd criticized Mira's cooking before, and then blurted out, it tasted like garbage. I kept my voice level and just stated the facts. Then I brought up the language thing, how her tics only happened in English. How we'd been to that Japanese restaurant and she was silent the whole time with the server who barely spoke English. How she met Terrell's grandmother who only spoke Spanish and didn't have one single outburst. I finished by telling them about our lunch last week. How I'd given her so many chances to insult me when we were alone. How I'd said I wanted a nose job and she was supportive. How I'd said I wanted to quit my job to be an artist even though I couldn't draw and she encouraged me. 0 tics, 0 outbursts, nothing. Because there was no audience to perform for. Kelsey's face went white like all the blood drained out. Then red rushed back in, making her cheeks look like they were burning. She stood up fast and her voice came out high and shaky. She said I was being cruel. She said she couldn't believe I would attack someone with a disability like this. She turned to the others and appealed to them with her hands out. She asked how I could accuse her of something so awful when she'd been vulnerable about her condition. She said she'd trusted us all with something personal, and now I was throwing it in her face. Her voice got louder and more upset. She said this was exactly why people with Tourette's were afraid to be open about it. Because people like me made them feel like they had to prove they were sick. Diana spoke up quietly from her spot on the couch. She said she'd been wondering about some of the same things. She brought up her promotion party when Kelsey called her stupid. She said it had bothered her for weeks because it felt so targeted and specific. Becca nodded slowly and admitted the comment about her boyfriend had felt wrong too. She said it wasn't just a random insult. It was the exact thing that would hurt most. I watched Kelsey's panic grow as her defenders started questioning her story. Her eyes darted around the room looking for someone to back her up. But nobody spoke up to defend her. Mira leaned forward and said she'd looked up Tourette's after the potluck when Kelsey insulted her cooking. She explained what she'd learned about tics being repetitive movements or sounds, not perfectly formed sentences designed to hurt someone. Brandon shifted in his seat and added that his cousin actually had Tourette's. He said it looked nothing like what Kelsey did. His cousin had motor tics where his shoulder jerked and he made this clicking sound with his tongue, over and over. The same movements, the same sounds, not different insults for different people in different situations. The energy in the room shifted. I could feel it. More people were doubting her now. More people were seeing what Terrell and I had seen. Kelsey changed tactics fast. Tears formed in her eyes and started running down her cheeks. She said her Tourette's presented differently than typical cases. She insisted that her doctor told her coprolalia could show up as context-specific phrases. She made her voice small and hurt. She said she couldn't believe her friends would doubt her during such a hard time in her life. She said dealing with this condition was already difficult enough without people questioning if it was real. She wiped at her eyes and her whole body shook like she was trying not to sob. Terrell spoke for the first time since we got there. His voice came out level but firm. He said he wouldn't sit quietly while someone used a fake disability to call him slurs. He looked right at Kelsey when he said it. He explained that he knew immediately at my birthday dinner that she was lying. He said he'd been waiting for months for other people to see through her act. He said he understood wanting to be supportive of friends, but there was a difference between supporting someone and letting them abuse you. Portia had been quiet through the whole thing, sitting on the edge of Diana's armchair with her arms crossed. She leaned forward now and looked straight at Kelsey. She asked why Kelsey never had tics when speaking Spanish or Japanese in restaurants. The question hung in the air and everyone turned to look at Kelsey. Kelsey's mouth opened and closed like she was trying to find words. She stammered something about how Tourette's worked differently in other languages. She said her doctor explained that her brain processed English differently, so the tics only happened in her native language. Even Mira, who had been defending Kelsey the hardest, looked confused by that explanation. Brandon shook his head slowly and said that didn't make any medical sense. Kelsey's face went red and she insisted it was true. She said everyone was twisting her words and making her sound like a liar. But her voice cracked when she said it, and I watched her credibility fall apart right in front of us. Nobody was nodding sympathetically anymore. Nobody rushed to explain or defend. The room had shifted completely. Diana stood up from the couch and her whole body was shaking. Her voice came out rough when she told Kelsey to leave her apartment. She said she'd been defending Kelsey for months while dealing with people at work who heard about the stupid comment. She talked about how embarrassed she felt having to explain that her friend had a condition and couldn't control what she said. She said she'd lost sleep wondering if people really thought she was incompetent. Her eyes filled with tears and she said she was done being manipulated. Kelsey started to protest, but Diana cut her off and pointed at the door. She said she wanted Kelsey out of her home right now. Kelsey's face crumpled and tears started pouring down her cheeks. She sobbed that we were all ganging up on her and it wasn't fair. She said she couldn't believe her friends would treat her this way when she was struggling with a disability. She looked around the room desperately trying to find someone who would defend her or comfort her. But Becca looked away. Mira stared at her hands. Brandon put his arm around Diana. Terrell's expression didn't change at all. Nobody moved to help her. The silence stretched out and Kelsey's sobs got louder and more dramatic. When she realized nobody was going to cave, she grabbed her purse off the coffee table. She stood up fast and knocked over her wine glass. Red wine spread across Diana's white rug, but Kelsey didn't even look at it. She called us all terrible people and said we'd regret this. Then she stormed toward the door and yanked it open. The door slammed behind her hard enough that the picture frames on the wall rattled and one fell off completely. We all heard her footsteps pounding down the hallway outside. Nobody spoke for what felt like a full minute. The wine kept spreading across the rug in a dark stain. Someone's phone buzzed, but nobody checked it. Mira's face crumpled and she started crying. She said she should have seen it sooner. She apologized over and over for being so stupid and not questioning things earlier. Becca moved across the room and put her arm around Mira's shoulders. Becca looked shocked, like she couldn't quite process what had just happened. Diana sank back down onto the couch and put her face in her hands. Brandon sat next to her and rubbed her back. I felt Terrell's hand squeeze mine and I realized I'd been holding my breath. We ended up staying at Diana's apartment for hours after that. Brandon ordered pizza because nobody felt like cooking, and we needed something normal to do with our hands. We talked through everything. Diana brought up the promotion party again and how specific that insult had been. She said Kelsey knew exactly what would hurt most because they'd talked about Diana's insecurities about being taken seriously at work. Becca admitted that Kelsey had made comments before about how Becca could do better than her boyfriend. Now those private opinions had come out as tics at the exact moment they'd cause maximum damage. Mira talked about the potluck and how she'd spent all day cooking to impress everyone. She said the garbage comment had made her not want to cook for the group anymore. We went through incident after incident and saw the pattern so clearly now. Every tick had been perfectly crafted to hurt someone using information Kelsey had gathered as a trusted friend. Portia said she felt sick realizing how calculated it all was. Brandon pointed out that Kelsey had been using our own values against us. She knew we wanted to be good, supportive friends who believed disability claims, so she exploited that. The pizza arrived and we ate it mostly in silence, each of us processing everything in our own way. Diana's apartment felt different now. Smaller somehow, but also more honest. We stayed until almost midnight, nobody wanting to leave and face the reality of what our friend group had just lost. But by the time we finally said goodbye, something had shifted. We'd all been carrying this weight of defending Kelsey and explaining her behavior and managing everyone's reactions to her outbursts. Now that weight was gone and I felt lighter, even though I also felt sad. Over the next few days, my phone kept buzzing with texts from people in the group. Diana sent a long message on Wednesday morning. She said she felt like she could finally breathe without worrying about the next insult. She talked about how much energy she'd spent defending Kelsey to her coworkers, and how liberating it felt to stop. She thanked me for speaking up because she'd been having doubts, but felt too guilty to voice them. Becca texted that she'd told her boyfriend what happened, and he was relieved. Apparently, he'd been dreading seeing Kelsey again after the ugly comment. Mira sent a voice message saying she'd been doing research on factitious disorders, and it was helping her understand what happened. Portia called me on Thursday night, and we talked for almost an hour. She said she'd been growing suspicious for weeks, but kept pushing the thoughts away. Every time she'd start to doubt Kelsey's story, she'd feel guilty for questioning a disability claim. She thanked me for having the courage to say what everyone was thinking. We talked about how Kelsey had weaponized social justice language to manipulate us. She'd used our desire to be supportive and inclusive as a shield for cruel behavior. On Friday afternoon, Kelsey sent a group text to everyone. She said we all owed her an apology and that she was consulting with her lawyer about defamation. She claimed we'd damaged her reputation by spreading lies about her medical condition. The text was long and detailed with lots of legal-sounding language about slander and emotional distress. I stared at my phone and waited to see if anyone would respond. Nobody did. The group chat stayed silent. 3 hours later, another text came through from Kelsey. This one was shorter and angrier. She called us all terrible people who had abandoned her when she needed support most. She said real friends would have stood by her instead of believing lies and conspiracy theories. She said she hoped we all felt good about ourselves for bullying someone with a disability. Still, nobody responded. I watched the read receipts pile up as everyone saw the messages, but the chat stayed quiet. That silence felt like its own kind of answer. Portia called me privately on Saturday morning. Her voice was quiet when she admitted she'd been growing suspicious for weeks before the confrontation. She said every time Kelsey had a tic, she'd notice little things that didn't add up. The way Kelsey's eyes would flick around the room right before an outburst like she was checking who was watching. The way the tics always happened at the most dramatic possible moment. The way they never interrupted Kelsey mid-sentence but always came at natural pauses in conversation. Portia said she'd felt so guilty about doubting a disability claim that she'd pushed all those observations away. She thanked me for trusting my instincts and speaking up even though it was socially risky. We talked for over an hour about how Kelsey had manipulated all of us. Portia pointed out that Kelsey had been really smart about it. She'd used language about ableism and disability rights to make us afraid to question her. Any doubt became an accusation that we were bad people who didn't support disabled friends. The manipulation had been subtle and effective, and we'd all fallen for it because we wanted to be good people. My phone rang on Sunday afternoon with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. A woman's voice asked if I was friends with Kelsey. She said her name was Amanda, and she knew Kelsey from a different friend group a few years ago. She'd heard through mutual connections that there was some drama about Kelsey's Tourette's diagnosis. She wanted to know if it was true that Kelsey actually had the condition. I didn't want to gossip, but something in her voice made me careful. I explained what we'd discovered without being mean about it. I told her about the patterns we'd noticed and the confrontation at Diana's apartment. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Amanda said that 2 years ago Kelsey had claimed to have lupus. She'd told their whole friend group she was dealing with a serious autoimmune condition. She'd canceled plans because of flare-ups and talked about her struggles with medication. But Amanda had never seen any actual symptoms. Kelsey never had the butterfly rash or joint swelling or any of the visible signs of lupus. She just had a lot of dramatic stories about doctor appointments and bad days. Eventually, that friend group had drifted apart for other reasons, but Amanda had always wondered. Now, hearing about the fake Tourette's, she realized it was a pattern. My stomach dropped as I listened to her. This wasn't just one lie. This was something Kelsey did repeatedly with different groups of people. That night, Terrell and I sat on our couch talking about everything. He said it felt satisfying to be proven right after months of knowing Kelsey was lying. But it also felt sad to lose someone we'd thought was a friend. He admitted he'd never really liked Kelsey even before the slur incident. Something about her had always felt performative to him. But he'd kept quiet because she was my friend, and he didn't want to cause problems. Now he said he was proud of me for trusting my instincts. He pointed out that I'd been willing to risk social consequences and friend group drama to stand up for what was right. That took courage, especially when everyone else was still defending Kelsey. I leaned against his shoulder and said I felt relieved more than anything. The constant doubt and second-guessing had been exhausting. Always wondering if I was being a bad friend for noticing patterns. Always feeling guilty for having suspicions. Now I knew I'd been right to trust what I saw. We sat there for a while, not saying much. The TV played quietly in the background. Terrell's arm was warm around my shoulders. Outside our window, the city lights blinked in the darkness. Everything felt different now, but also somehow more solid and real. The following weekend, Diana sent out a group text inviting everyone to her place again. She specifically mentioned it would be nice to hang out without drama. Nobody needed to ask what that meant. I showed up with Terrell and a bottle of wine. Becca arrived with her boyfriend. Mira brought homemade cookies. Portia came straight from work, still in her business clothes. We settled into Diana's living room and someone put on music and the conversation started flowing naturally. It felt different right away. Nobody was tense or waiting for something bad to happen. Nobody was watching their words or preparing to do damage control. We just talked and laughed like normal people having a normal evening. I found myself relaxing in a way I hadn't in months. My shoulders dropped. My jaw unclenched. I hadn't realized how much stress I'd been carrying until it was gone. We talked about regular stuff like weekend plans and new restaurants and a movie someone had seen. Simple conversations that didn't require managing anyone's feelings or navigating around potential insults disguised as medical symptoms. Around 9 o'clock, Becca's boyfriend brought up how relieved he felt not having to deal with Kelsey anymore. He said it quietly, like he wasn't sure if it was okay to mention her name. Becca squeezed his hand and told him it was fine to talk about it. She explained to all of us that she'd been making excuses for Kelsey's behavior to him for months after the anniversary dinner incident. Every time he'd expressed frustration about being insulted, she'd defended Kelsey and explained about the Tourette's, and asked him to be understanding. He'd gone along with it because he trusted Becca, but he'd never believed Kelsey actually had a medical condition. He said the whole situation had caused tension between them, because he felt like Becca was choosing her friend over him. Now that Kelsey was out of the picture, their relationship felt stronger. They'd been communicating better, and he felt like Becca actually had his back instead of defending someone who'd disrespected him. Becca admitted she felt terrible about putting him through that. She said she'd been so focused on being a supportive friend that she'd ignored her own boyfriend's legitimate feelings. The whole group nodded in understanding. We'd all been doing the same thing in different ways. 3 days later, I ran into Kelsey at the grocery store. I was in the produce section picking through avocados when I heard her voice behind me calling my name. I turned around and there she was with a shopping basket looking completely normal, like nothing had happened. She smiled and asked how I'd been and what I'd been up to. Her tone was cheerful and friendly, like we were still close friends who just hadn't seen each other in a while. I stared at her for a second, trying to process the audacity. I kept my voice flat and said I'd been fine. She kept talking about her week and some show she'd been watching, and did I want to grab coffee sometime. I picked up my avocados and said I needed to finish shopping. Her smile faltered. She stepped closer and her whole face changed. The friendly mask dropped and something cold showed underneath. She hissed that I'd ruined her life. She said I'd turned everyone against her and destroyed her friendships and made her look like a liar. Her voice was low and angry and nothing like the cheerful tone from 30 seconds earlier. I told her she'd done that to herself by faking a disability to hurt people. She said I had no proof and that I was just jealous of the attention she got. I pushed my cart past her and walked away. She called after me that I'd regret this, but I kept walking. My hands shook as I loaded groceries into my car. That night, I checked social media and saw that Kelsey had posted several vague messages about fake friends and betrayal. She wrote about people who abandon you when you need them most, and how she'd learned who her real friends were. She posted quotes about loyalty and backstabbing. She shared articles about disability discrimination. Every post was clearly about our situation, but written to make herself look like the victim. Within hours, I started getting messages from mutual acquaintances who hadn't been at Diana's apartment. They'd seen Kelsey's posts and wanted to know what happened. They asked if it was true that we'd all cut her off. They wanted my side of the story. I responded to each message with the same basic facts. I explained the patterns we'd noticed with her tics. I described how her insults always matched opinions she'd expressed privately before. I mentioned how her Tourette's only happened in English and never when we were alone. I didn't embellish or add drama. I just laid out what we'd observed and let people draw their own conclusions. Most of them responded with some version of "now that you mention it" or "I always wondered about that." A few days after that, I got a message from someone named Leah. She introduced herself as a coworker of Diana's who I'd met briefly at a few parties. She said Diana had told her what happened with Kelsey, and she wanted to get coffee if I had time. Something about her message felt genuine, so I agreed to meet her at a cafe near my apartment. Leah showed up exactly on time with a warm smile and ordered us both lattes. She got straight to the point. She said she'd had a similar experience in college with someone who faked having lupus for attention. Her whole friend group had rallied around this person and supported them through their supposed illness. They'd helped with rides to doctor appointments and brought meals and excused all kinds of bad behavior because their friend was sick. It took almost 2 years before someone discovered the person had never actually been diagnosed with lupus and had been making everything up. Leah said the betrayal had felt devastating. She'd questioned her own judgment for years afterward, wondering how she'd been fooled so completely. Hearing about what happened with Kelsey had brought all those feelings back, but also made her feel less alone in the experience. We talked for over an hour about manipulation and guilt, and how people exploit others' desire to be supportive. Leah pulled out her phone and showed me some articles about factitious disorders and something called Munchausen syndrome. She explained that some people fabricate illnesses or disabilities because of deep psychological needs for attention or sympathy. The articles described patterns that sounded exactly like Kelsey. People who claimed different conditions over time. People whose symptoms never quite matched the actual medical condition. People who thrived on the drama and attention their supposed illness created. Reading those articles shifted something in me. I'd been angry at Kelsey for lying and hurting people. But understanding that she likely had serious psychological problems made me feel something closer to pity, mixed with continued frustration. It didn't excuse what she'd done, but it provided context for why someone would do something so destructive. Leah and I finished our coffee and exchanged numbers. She said Diana had mentioned the friend group was getting together soon, and she'd love to join if that was okay. I told her I'd check with everyone, but I was sure they'd be happy to have her. I told her sister I appreciated her reaching out, and that I hoped Kelsey would get the help she needed. The conversation lasted another 20 minutes as she shared stories about Kelsey claiming to have various conditions throughout high school and college. She'd told people she had chronic fatigue syndrome during her sophomore year of college, then switched to claiming she had fibromyalgia when that didn't get enough attention. Her sister's voice cracked when she explained how their parents had taken Kelsey to dozens of specialists who all found nothing wrong. She said the family had been trying to get Kelsey into therapy for years, but she refused to go, insisting that everyone else was the problem. I hung up feeling a strange mix of sadness and relief. The sadness came from understanding that Kelsey was deeply troubled and had been hurting people for years. The relief came from knowing my instincts had been right and I wasn't crazy for doubting her story. I texted Diana to fill her in on what I'd learned, and she responded immediately saying it all made sense now. 2 weeks later, Diana called me with exciting news. She'd gotten another promotion at work, a bigger one this time that came with a significant raise and her own team to manage. We organized a celebration dinner at the same restaurant where Kelsey had called her stupid during her last promotion party. This time the energy was completely different. Everyone arrived smiling and relaxed, and we ordered appetizers and drinks without any underlying tension. Diana stood up partway through the meal and raised her glass. She thanked us for standing by her through everything that had happened with Kelsey. She said learning to trust her own perceptions and set boundaries had actually made her a better leader at work. Her voice was steady and confident as she talked about how the experience had taught her not to accept disrespect from anyone, even when it came wrapped in excuses. We all clinked glasses, and someone made a joke about how nice it was to celebrate without worrying about surprise insults. The laughter that followed felt genuine and free in a way our gatherings hadn't felt in months. That night when Terrell and I got home, he mentioned something while we were getting ready for bed. He said I seemed lighter somehow, less tense in my shoulders and more present in conversations. I thought about it and realized he was right. For months I'd been carrying this low-level anxiety about managing Kelsey's behavior and second-guessing my own observations. Every group gathering had required mental preparation for whatever might come out of her mouth. Every private conversation had involved weighing whether to share my concerns or keep quiet to avoid causing drama. All that energy had been freed up when I finally confronted the situation. I could just exist with my friends now without constantly monitoring and managing someone else's behavior. Terrell pulled me close and said he was proud of how I'd handled everything. He reminded me that he'd known from the beginning, but had waited for me to reach my own conclusions, because he knew I needed to trust my own judgment. The following weekend, Becca invited everyone over for brunch at her apartment. She'd been dating her boyfriend for almost 3 years, and we all knew they were serious. But when she stood up to make an announcement, I wasn't expecting what came next. She said they were moving in together and had already found a place with an extra bedroom for when friends visited. Everyone congratulated them and asked about the new apartment. Then Becca looked directly at me and said something that surprised me. She told the group that watching me stand up to Kelsey had inspired her to be more assertive in her own life. She explained that she'd spent years second-guessing her instincts and molding herself to please other people. When her boyfriend had been insulted at their anniversary dinner, she'd felt angry but had pushed those feelings down to be supportive of Kelsey's supposed condition. Seeing me trust my observations and speak up for the truth had shown her that it was okay to prioritize her own judgment over social pressure. She said it had affected more than just the Kelsey situation. She'd started speaking up more at work, setting clearer boundaries with her family, and being more honest with her boyfriend about what she wanted. Her boyfriend squeezed her hand and smiled, and I felt a surge of unexpected pride that my actions had helped someone else find their voice. The conversation naturally shifted to a discussion about how we'd all enabled Kelsey's behavior. Mira admitted she'd noticed inconsistencies early on, but had talked herself out of questioning them because she didn't want to be the person who doubted someone's disability. Diana said she'd felt the same way, especially after we'd all read those articles about Tourette's and promised to be supportive. We'd been so focused on being good allies that we'd ignored obvious red flags. Now, Becca pointed out that Kelsey had weaponized our desire to be understanding and used it as a shield for increasingly cruel behavior. We talked about how important it was to believe people when they disclosed disabilities or health conditions, but also how it was okay to notice when someone's story didn't add up. The pattern had been so clear in hindsight. Every tick perfectly matched a private opinion Kelsey had expressed before. Every outburst happened at the exact moment that would cause maximum damage to the target. Every explanation relied on us feeling too guilty to question her further. We made a pact to trust our instincts more in future friendships, and to communicate honestly with each other when something felt off. Leah had been quiet during most of this conversation, but she spoke up when there was a pause. She shared that she'd dealt with her own challenges around being believed when she disclosed a real health condition a few years ago. Some people had been skeptical because her condition wasn't visible and her symptoms fluctuated. She'd had to bring documentation to work and educate friends about what she was dealing with. Hearing about Kelsey's fake claims had brought up frustration because people like Kelsey made it harder for those with genuine disabilities to be taken seriously. When someone fakes a condition for attention, it creates doubt that spills over onto everyone else. Doctors become more skeptical. Friends become more cautious about offering support. Employers question whether accommodations are really necessary. The harm extended far beyond just our friend group. We sat with that reality for a moment, understanding that Kelsey's lies had broader implications than just the hurt feelings of people she'd insulted. She'd contributed to a culture of doubt that affected countless others who were dealing with real medical challenges. 3 weeks later, I got invited to a birthday party for someone I knew through work. I almost didn't go when I saw that Kelsey was invited, but Terrell encouraged me to attend and not let her presence control my social life. I walked in and immediately spotted Kelsey across the room. She saw me at the same time and her face went pale. For the next 2 hours, she stayed on the opposite side of the party, avoiding not just me, but Diana, Becca, and Mira, who had also shown up. She left early without saying goodbye to anyone, and I noticed several people commenting on how quiet and subdued she'd been. The host mentioned that Kelsey seemed different somehow, less animated and attention-seeking than usual. Someone else said they'd noticed Kelsey hadn't had any tics all evening, which they found strange given how frequent her outbursts supposedly were. I didn't offer any explanation, just listened to people starting to form their own conclusions. The host called me 2 days later. She'd noticed the tension at the party and wanted to understand what had happened. She admitted she'd invited Kelsey before knowing about the situation, and felt terrible about creating an awkward dynamic. I explained everything from the beginning, walking her through the pattern of targeted insults, the convenient timing, the language specificity, and the private lunch test. She listened without interrupting and then let out a long breath. She said she'd always found Kelsey's Tourette's claims suspicious, but had felt like she couldn't question them without being a terrible person. The tics had seemed too perfectly crafted and too situationally convenient. She'd watched Kelsey insult people at multiple gatherings, and had noticed that the victims were always people Kelsey had complained about privately before. But she'd pushed down her doubts because disability awareness was important, and she didn't want to be on the wrong side of that issue. Now that she understood what was really happening, she felt relieved to finally have confirmation of what her instincts had been telling her all along. 3 months passed, and our friend group settled into a new normal. We'd added Leah as a core member, and she fit in perfectly with her straightforward personality and genuine warmth. We occasionally included other acquaintances at gatherings, and the dynamic felt more relaxed and authentic than it had in over a year. Nobody had to walk on eggshells or brace for surprise insults. We could compliment each other without worrying that someone would immediately undercut the moment with a cruel comment disguised as a tic. The constant low-level management of Kelsey's behavior and feelings was gone, replaced by easier and more honest interactions. Diana hosted a game night and we stayed up late laughing and talking without any underlying tension. Becca brought her boyfriend and he actually seemed to enjoy himself instead of looking uncomfortable and targeted. Mira made her famous lasagna, and everyone praised it enthusiastically, without any cruel commentary about her cooking skills. The absence of Kelsey's toxicity had created space for our friendships to deepen and become more genuine. Diana pulled me aside during that game night and shared something personal. She'd been in therapy for the past 2 months processing everything that had happened. Her therapist had helped her understand manipulation tactics and emotional abuse, and she was learning to recognize patterns she'd missed before. She explained that Kelsey had exploited social pressure around disability to avoid accountability for genuinely harmful behavior. The therapy sessions had helped her identify similar dynamics in other relationships, including with a coworker who used different excuses to justify disrespectful treatment. Diana said she was setting better boundaries across all areas of her life now. She'd stopped accepting behavior that made her uncomfortable just because someone had a good excuse or made her feel guilty for objecting. She thanked me again for speaking up because it had set off a chain reaction of positive changes in her life that extended far beyond just removing one toxic friend from the group. I started hearing things through mutual friends about a month later. Portia had been at a professional networking event downtown when Kelsey walked up to her near the refreshment table. Kelsey smiled bright and asked how Portia was doing, like they were still close friends who talked regularly. Portia kept her answers short and polite but didn't engage beyond basic pleasantries. She told me later that Kelsey's friendliness felt fake and forced, like she was performing for the other people standing nearby. When Portia excused herself to go talk to someone else, Kelsey raised her voice just enough for the surrounding group to hear. She made a comment about how sad it was when people abandoned friends who had disabilities, how some people claimed to support disability rights but showed their true colors when things got hard. Portia felt everyone's eyes on her back as she walked away. She said her first instinct was to turn around and defend herself, to explain the real situation to these strangers who were probably judging her. But she kept walking. She found a quiet corner and took some deep breaths and reminded herself that engaging with Kelsey's manipulation was exactly what Kelsey wanted. Portia called me that same evening and we talked for over an hour. She said walking away without responding felt like a huge victory, even though it had been difficult. She recognized the manipulation attempt for what it was and refused to participate in Kelsey's drama. When we all got together the following weekend, Portia shared the whole story with the group. We celebrated how far she'd come in recognizing toxic behavior and setting boundaries. Diana said it was growth for all of us, learning to spot manipulation and not get sucked into defending ourselves to people who already made up their minds. The whole experience with Kelsey had taught us to trust our instincts and not engage with people who were trying to make us look bad. Brandon joined us at that gathering and he pulled me aside at one point to say something I wasn't expecting. He thanked me for what I'd done, for speaking up about Kelsey and getting her out of the friend group. He said he'd been dreading every single social event with us for months because of her. Every time Becca invited him to meet her friends, he felt sick to his stomach knowing Kelsey would be there. He never knew what cruel things she'd say about him or their relationship. The comment about him being ugly at their anniversary dinner had really hurt, even though he tried to play it off at the time. He said Becca's friends were important to her, and he wanted to be part of that world, but Kelsey made it miserable. Now he actually looked forward to hanging out with us. He felt respected and welcomed instead of targeted and insulted. Becca overheard part of the conversation and came over to hug both of us. She said their relationship was stronger now that she wasn't constantly making excuses for someone who disrespected him. That conversation with Brandon stuck with me for days afterward. I thought about how being a good friend isn't just about offering support no matter what. Sometimes being a good friend means having difficult conversations and setting boundaries. It means standing up when you see someone being hurt, even if the person doing the hurting has a good excuse. I'd spent so long worried about being the kind of person who doubted disabilities that I almost let Kelsey keep hurting people I cared about. Terrell and I talked about it one night while making dinner together. He said watching me find my voice and stand up for what was right had made him love me even more. He'd seen me struggle with the decision for weeks, weighing my values against my observations, and he was proud of how I handled the whole situation. I told him I couldn't have done it without his support and his initial skepticism that helped me trust my own instincts. Our group started planning a weekend trip about 2 weeks after that conversation. We'd talked about doing a group vacation for years but could never get everyone coordinated. Diana suggested we rent a cabin in the mountains for a long weekend. The planning process was surprisingly smooth. Everyone responded to messages quickly and contributed ideas without any drama or tension. Mira found a great rental property with enough bedrooms for all of us. Becca created a shared document for meal planning and everyone added their favorite foods. Leah offered to coordinate activities and researched hiking trails and local attractions. I realized halfway through the planning that this never would have worked when Kelsey was part of the group. There had always been underlying tension making it hard to coordinate anything. Someone would suggest an idea, and Kelsey would find something wrong with it. She'd complain about costs or locations or timing in ways that derailed the whole conversation. Now we were moving forward easily because everyone genuinely wanted to make it work, and nobody was creating obstacles just to create obstacles. The weekend trip happened in early fall when the leaves were changing colors. We drove up Friday afternoon and spent the evening settling into the cabin and making dinner together. Saturday we hiked during the day, and that night we built a bonfire in the backyard. The fire crackled and sent sparks up into the dark sky while we sat in a circle with blankets and drinks. Diana started talking about what she'd learned from the whole Kelsey situation. She said it taught her to trust her instincts even when her instincts went against what she thought she should believe. She'd known something was wrong with Kelsey's behavior, but kept pushing those thoughts away because she didn't want to be wrong about someone's disability. Now she was working in therapy on listening to her gut feelings and not dismissing them just because they made her uncomfortable. Becca agreed and said she learned that supporting someone doesn't mean accepting harmful behavior. You can believe someone has struggles while still holding them accountable for how they treat others. Mira added that the experience taught her the importance of honest communication in friendships. We'd all been talking around the problem instead of addressing it directly, and that just let the situation get worse. Leah had been quiet during most of the conversation, listening to everyone share their experiences. When there was a pause, she spoke up and said being welcomed into our group had been really meaningful for her. She appreciated that we were all committed to real relationships, instead of just performing friendship for social media or appearances. She said she'd been in friend groups before where people were fake nice to each other but talked behind each other's backs constantly. Our group felt different because we'd been through something hard together and came out stronger. Her perspective as someone who joined after all the drama helped us see how much we'd actually grown and changed. We weren't the same people who had nodded sympathetically every time Kelsey blamed her cruelty on a medical condition. We'd learned to recognize manipulation and set boundaries and have hard conversations when necessary. I heard through a mutual acquaintance about 3 weeks after the trip that Kelsey had moved to a different city. The person who told me wasn't sure if it was for a job or just a fresh start, but Kelsey was gone from our area entirely. Part of me hoped she was getting professional help and making better choices in her new location. Part of me hoped she was learning to take responsibility for her actions instead of hiding behind excuses. But mostly I just felt relief that she was no longer in our social world. And I didn't have to worry about running into her at events or hearing through friends that she was spreading lies about us. She was someone else's problem now, or hopefully she was working on herself and not creating problems for anyone. I shared the news with the group, and everyone had similar reactions. We wished her well from a distance, but were grateful for the geographic separation. Diana decided to host a gathering to mark the 1-year anniversary of when I first confronted Kelsey at her apartment. She sent out invitations calling it an honesty and growth celebration. We all showed up with food and drinks and spent the evening laughing and talking and remembering how far we'd come. Diana made a toast to real friendship built on trust and honesty, instead of walking on eggshells. We clinked our glasses together, and I looked around at these people who'd been willing to face an uncomfortable truth with me. We could have taken the easy path and kept making excuses for Kelsey. We could have let her keep hurting people because confronting her felt too hard. Instead, we'd chosen the difficult conversation and come out stronger on the other side. The evening felt light and genuine in a way our gatherings hadn't felt in over a year. Mira brought someone new to our next gathering about 2 weeks later. She introduced him as her boyfriend, and he seemed nervous meeting all of us at once. But everyone welcomed him warmly and included him in conversations and made him feel comfortable. Mira pulled me aside later in the evening and said she wouldn't have felt okay bringing him around when Kelsey was part of the group. She never knew what cruel comment might come out, and she didn't want to subject someone she cared about to that treatment. Now she felt confident bringing him into this space because she knew he'd be treated with respect and kindness. Watching her introduce her boyfriend with pride and confidence made me realize how much Kelsey's presence had affected all of us in ways we hadn't even fully recognized until she was gone. Becca's boyfriend Brandon came up with the idea to celebrate our anniversary at Diana's place with everyone. He said it would be perfect because the friend group had been there for us through everything, and they deserved to share in the good moments too. Terrell agreed immediately, and I liked the thought of marking this milestone surrounded by people who actually cared about us. Diana offered to host and said she'd handle the food if everyone else brought drinks. The night of our anniversary, we showed up at Diana's apartment with a bottle of wine and found the living room decorated with streamers and a banner that said, "Congratulations." Mira had made a cake with our names on it, and Portia brought flowers for the table. Leah arrived with her girlfriend, who we'd met once before, and they both seemed excited to celebrate with us. We sat around Diana's dining table eating pasta and garlic bread, while everyone took turns sharing stories about Terrell and me. Brandon told a story about the first time he met Terrell and how protective Terrell had been when asking about his intentions with Becca. Diana shared that she'd known we were solid as a couple from the way Terrell looked at me during the whole Kelsey situation. Portia said she admired how we handled conflict together instead of letting it divide us. Leah raised her glass and said she hoped to find a relationship as strong as ours someday. Terrell squeezed my hand under the table, and I felt grateful for these people and this moment. After dinner, Brandon made a toast and joked that surviving the Kelsey drama together was probably better than any couples therapy we could have paid for. Everyone laughed, and Terrell agreed and said dealing with that situation had taught us to communicate better and trust each other's instincts. I added that facing challenges as a team had deepened our relationship in ways that easy times never could. We clinked glasses, and I looked around the table at friends who'd stood by us and chosen honesty over comfort. The evening felt light and genuine and full of the kind of connection that only comes from going through something difficult together. A few days later, I got a message on social media from someone named Jessica, who I'd met twice at mutual friend gatherings but didn't know well. She said she'd heard through connections about what happened with Kelsey and wanted advice about a similar situation. Her friend had recently claimed to have a chronic illness, but Jessica noticed the symptoms only appeared at convenient times. She felt terrible for doubting someone's health issues, but the patterns were too obvious to ignore. I read her message twice before responding, because I remembered how alone I'd felt when I first started questioning Kelsey. I wrote back and told her to trust her observations while being thoughtful about how she addressed it. I explained that supporting someone doesn't mean accepting behavior that hurts people, and that real disabilities don't work as convenient excuses for cruelty. I shared some of the research I'd done about Tourette's and suggested she do similar homework about her friend's claimed condition. I encouraged her to talk to other friends privately and see if they'd noticed the same patterns. I warned her that confronting someone who's lying about a disability would be difficult, and she might lose the friendship. I said it was worth it anyway because letting someone weaponize a fake diagnosis hurts everyone, including people with real disabilities. Jessica thanked me and said she felt less crazy knowing someone else had been through something similar. I told her to reach out anytime if she needed support, and felt good about helping someone else navigate this difficult territory. Our next gathering happened at Mira's apartment 2 weeks later, and I noticed immediately that the group had grown. Diana brought a coworker named Noah who she'd been mentioning lately. Becca invited a couple she knew from her gym who'd just moved to the area. Portia showed up with 2 friends from her book club who were curious about our group. Leah brought her girlfriend again, plus another friend who worked at the disability rights organization, where Leah volunteered. The apartment felt crowded in a good way, with new voices and fresh energy mixing with our established dynamic. Noah told funny stories about working in tech, and the gym couple talked about training for a marathon together. The book club friends debated whether the latest bestseller was worth the hype. Leah's coworker shared information about an upcoming fundraiser for disability advocacy. I watched everyone interact and realized our friend group had evolved into something more open and welcoming than it used to be. We weren't as closed off or protective of our circle anymore. The Kelsey situation had taught us that hiding problems doesn't make them go away, and that healthy groups can handle difficult conversations. The core group of Diana, Becca, Mira, Portia, Leah, Terrell, and me remained close, but we were more willing to expand now. New people brought diverse perspectives and positive energy without the baggage of our past drama. I appreciated how our group had grown stronger and more authentic through everything we'd been through together. Becca called me 3 weeks later with news that made her voice shake with excitement. Brandon had proposed during a weekend trip to the mountains, and she'd said yes immediately. She wanted to celebrate with the friend group before telling extended family, because we'd been there for her through the worst parts of her relationship doubts. Diana offered to host an engagement party at her place the following Saturday, and everyone cleared their schedules. The night of the celebration, Becca arrived with Brandon and showed off her ring while we all crowded around to admire it. The diamond caught the light as she moved her hand, and her smile was bigger than I'd seen in years. We ate appetizers and drank champagne and listened to Brandon tell the proposal story with Becca interrupting to add details he forgot. The evening felt like pure joy without any undercurrent of tension or worry about someone ruining the moment. No one had to brace for a cruel comment disguised as a medical condition. No one had to manage another person's feelings or make excuses for bad behavior. We could just be happy for our friends without any complications. Later in the evening, Becca pulled me aside into Diana's kitchen and thanked me for helping her learn to trust her judgment. She said watching me confront Kelsey had given her confidence to stop second-guessing herself in all areas of life. She explained that she'd been doubting whether Brandon was right for her, partly because Kelsey kept making comments about him not being good enough. Once Kelsey was out of the picture, Becca realized her relationship was actually solid, and she could commit fully without outside interference. I hugged her and said I was glad she'd found someone who treated her well, and that she deserved this happiness. We went back to the living room and rejoined the celebration, feeling grateful for friendships that had survived difficult times and come out stronger. I started my new job on a Monday in late spring at a marketing firm downtown. The office was modern with glass walls and an open floor plan that made everything visible. My manager introduced me to the team during a morning meeting and explained my role handling client communications. Within the first week, I noticed patterns in how people interacted that reminded me of lessons from the Kelsey experience. A coworker named Ryan frequently blamed technology problems for missed deadlines, but I observed him spending significant time on personal calls. Another coworker named Jennifer made passive-aggressive comments about other team members, then claimed she was just being honest. I recognized manipulation tactics that I might have missed or excused before dealing with Kelsey. When Ryan tried to blame a system error for work he simply hadn't done, I asked specific questions about the error that made it clear I wasn't accepting vague excuses. When Jennifer made a cutting remark about a colleague's presentation, then said she was just trying to help, I pointed out that helpful feedback doesn't need to be delivered as an insult. My manager noticed my directness and commented that I had good instincts for workplace dynamics. I realized the skills I'd developed navigating the Kelsey situation had made me more confident and assertive in professional settings. I could spot dishonesty faster and set boundaries without feeling guilty. The difficult experience had taught me that being nice doesn't mean accepting poor treatment, and that calling out problems early prevents bigger issues later. I felt grateful for the growth even though the path to get there had been painful. Diana invited everyone to dinner at a nice restaurant to celebrate her promotion to senior director at her company. She'd been working toward this position for 3 years, and finally got the offer with a significant raise and a team of people reporting to her. We gathered at an Italian place downtown and ordered multiple bottles of wine and too much food. Diana gave a short speech thanking us for supporting her through a challenging year of personal and professional growth. She said the past 12 months had taught her to address problems directly, rather than avoiding conflict, and that skill had made her a better leader. She explained that her new role required managing difficult conversations with team members and clients, and she felt prepared because of everything she'd learned from the Kelsey situation. She credited the experience with helping her develop stronger communication skills and more confidence in her judgment. Portia raised her glass and said Diana had always been a natural leader, but now she had the wisdom to back it up. Mira added that Diana's promotion was well-deserved and long overdue. Terrell said he'd seen Diana grow tremendously over the past year, and her company was lucky to have her. I felt proud watching my friend receive recognition she'd earned while also becoming a better version of herself through difficult circumstances. The evening felt like a celebration of growth and success that came from facing challenges head-on, instead of pretending problems didn't exist. At our next gathering, Portia shared that she'd been seeing a therapist for the past few months to work through some personal issues. She said the Kelsey situation had made her realize she had patterns of doubting herself and prioritizing other people's comfort over her own instincts. Her therapist had helped her identify people-pleasing tendencies that went back to childhood, and she was learning to balance being supportive with maintaining healthy skepticism. She explained that she'd been so focused on being a good friend to Kelsey that she'd ignored obvious signs of manipulation because confronting them felt uncomfortable. Her therapist had introduced concepts about boundaries and authentic relationships that were changing how Portia approached all her friendships. She shared some insights about recognizing when support becomes enabling and how to trust your observations even when someone claims you're being unsupportive. Diana said she'd been thinking about similar issues in therapy and appreciated Portia being open about the work she was doing. Becca admitted she'd also been questioning why she'd been so quick to excuse Kelsey's behavior and realized she had her own people-pleasing patterns to address. Mira nodded and said she'd been raised to always give people the benefit of the doubt, which made her vulnerable to manipulation. We all benefited from Portia's willingness to share what she was learning, and the conversation opened up space for everyone to reflect on their own growth. I felt grateful for friends who were willing to do the hard work of understanding themselves better and becoming more authentic in their relationships. Leah suggested our friend group volunteer together at the disability rights organization where she worked part-time. She said it would be meaningful to do something positive after the negative experience with Kelsey, and we all agreed immediately. We signed up for a Saturday morning shift helping with an awareness event in the park. The organization had set up information booths about different disabilities, and we helped distribute materials and answer basic questions from people who stopped by. I spent 2 hours talking to families and individuals about resources available for people with disabilities. I learned more about the real challenges people face, including dealing with skepticism because of others who fake conditions for attention or benefits. A woman with multiple sclerosis told me she'd been accused of exaggerating her symptoms because some days she appeared fine while other days she could barely function. A man with Tourette's explained that people often don't believe his diagnosis because his tics are mild motor movements, rather than the coprolalia that media portrays. A parent of a child with autism shared frustration about people questioning whether her son really needed accommodations. These conversations reinforced that Kelsey's behavior had broader harmful impacts beyond just our friend group. People who fake disabilities make it harder for those with genuine conditions to be believed and supported. The volunteer experience felt like a small way to contribute something positive and educate ourselves about real disability experiences, rather than the fake version Kelsey had performed. Leah brought 3 of her friends to our next gathering and introduced them as people she'd known since college. They were visiting from out of town, and Leah thought they'd enjoy meeting her local friend group. The 3 friends fit in naturally with easy conversation and genuine interest in getting to know everyone. One of them worked as a social worker and shared interesting stories about her job. Another was finishing a graduate degree in public health and had thoughtful perspectives on healthcare access. The third was a teacher who made everyone laugh with stories about her students. Our social circle continued to grow in healthy ways, with new people bringing fresh perspectives and none of the baggage from the Kelsey situation. I noticed how different these gatherings felt compared to when Kelsey was part of the group. There was no tension or worry about someone saying something cruel. No one had to walk on eggshells or manage another person's unpredictable behavior. We could relax and enjoy each other's company without the constant low-level stress that Kelsey's presence had created. I appreciated how our group had evolved into something stronger and more authentic. We'd learned that real friendship meant being honest even when it was difficult, and supporting each other through challenges rather than enabling harmful behavior. The new people joining our circle benefited from the foundation we'd built through surviving something painful together. 18 months after the confrontation at Diana's apartment, I ran into Kelsey's sister at a coffee shop downtown. I almost didn't recognize her at first, but she approached me with a tentative smile and asked if we could talk for a minute. We sat at a table by the window, and she thanked me for setting boundaries with Kelsey, even though it had been difficult. She said Kelsey had struggled significantly after losing our entire friend group and had finally agreed to start therapy 6 months ago. The therapist had diagnosed her with factitious disorder, and they were working on understanding her pattern of fabricating health issues for attention. Kelsey's sister explained that Kelsey was starting to acknowledge what she'd done, though she still had trouble taking full responsibility. She said recovery would take years and might never be complete, but therapy was the first time Kelsey had admitted she had a problem. She thanked me again for being the one who forced consequences instead of continuing to enable the behavior. She said watching Kelsey lose all her friends had been the wake-up call she needed, even though it had been painful to witness. I told her I hoped Kelsey continued with treatment and found healthier ways to get her needs met. I said I wasn't interested in resuming any kind of relationship, but I genuinely wished her well from a distance. We finished our coffee and said goodbye, and I walked out feeling a complex mix of emotions about the update. I felt glad Kelsey was getting help, but knew our friendship couldn't be fixed. The betrayal ran too deep, and the manipulation had damaged too much trust. And I told her sister I hoped therapy would help Kelsey build healthier relationships in the future. But I also made it clear I wasn't interested in reconnecting or receiving updates about her progress. That boundary protected my peace and the health of my friend group. We'd all worked too hard to rebuild after her lies to risk letting her back in. I wished her well from a distance, the way you might wish well for anyone struggling with serious issues. But wishing someone well didn't mean opening my life back up to them. Some doors close for good reasons, and this was one of them. 3 weeks later, Terrell and I hosted a dinner party at our place. We invited Diana, Becca, Mira, Portia, and Leah, along with 3 of Terrell's colleagues from work. I spent the afternoon cooking while Terrell set up the dining room table with our nice dishes. The doorbell started ringing at 7, and soon our apartment filled with voices and laughter. Terrell's coworker Noah brought wine, and his wife brought homemade bread. Everyone mingled easily in the living room while I finished the last dishes in the kitchen. Diana helped me carry platters to the table and whispered that she loved seeing our 2 social circles come together. Dinner flowed with easy conversation about everything from work projects to travel plans to ridiculous stories about pets. Noah told a story about his cat that had everyone crying with laughter. Leah and Terrell's other coworker Sarah discovered they both loved the same obscure podcast and spent 20 minutes enthusiastically discussing episodes. And I looked around the table at all these people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company and felt grateful for what we'd built. After dessert, people moved back to the living room with coffee, and the conversation continued for another 2 hours. When everyone finally left around midnight, Terrell helped me load the dishwasher. He told me he was proud of the community we'd created together. I realized he was right. Losing Kelsey had actually opened space for deeper and more real connections. Without her negative energy and constant drama, we'd been able to welcome new people and strengthen existing friendships. The evening had felt warm and easy in a way our gatherings never had when Kelsey was part of the group. 2 nights later, Diana, Becca, Mira, Portia, Leah, and I had a girls' night at Mira's apartment. We ordered takeout and settled on her couch with wine and snacks. The conversation eventually turned to everything we'd been through with Kelsey. Diana said the whole experience had taught her to trust her instincts more. Becca agreed and added that she'd learned the importance of honest communication, even when it felt uncomfortable. Mira said she used to avoid conflict at all costs, but now understood that sometimes confrontation was necessary and healthy. Portia admitted she'd been too quick to doubt herself when things didn't add up with Kelsey's story. Leah said watching us work through that difficult situation had shown her what real friendship looked like. We talked about how painful it had been to realize someone we cared about had been manipulating us, but we also acknowledged that going through it together had made our friendship stronger. We'd learned to communicate more directly and support each other through hard truths instead of just comfortable lies. The Kelsey situation had forced us all to grow in ways that benefited every relationship in our lives. We stayed up late talking and laughing, and I felt grateful for friends who were willing to face uncomfortable realities and build something better together. 2 years passed since the confrontation at Diana's apartment. Our friend group continued to thrive with bonds based on honesty and real care for each other. Diana got another promotion, and we celebrated without any worry about someone ruining the moment. Becca and her boyfriend got married in a beautiful ceremony where everyone could relax and enjoy themselves. Mira started her own catering business, and we all supported her by recommending her to everyone we knew. Portia moved to a new apartment, and we helped her paint and decorate. Leah introduced us to her new girlfriend, and she fit right into the group. Terrell and I hosted regular dinner parties that brought together our expanding circle of friends. We'd all grown individually and together from what happened with Kelsey. I'd learned that real friendship meant being honest even when it was hard. Diana had learned to set boundaries and trust her judgment. Becca had learned to speak up when something felt wrong. Mira had learned that avoiding conflict only made things worse. Portia had learned to trust her instincts instead of doubting herself. Leah had found a group of friends who valued authenticity over performance.